So again, somatization, we're looking at kind of, I think that we've all probably experienced this, living in kind of a Western fast-paced society where the body ends up absorbing social stress and manifests symptoms, and that could be, a lot of it is biological to a certain level. It could be in our heads that we stress out over our jobs or stuff like that, but we are going to produce cortisol, which is a stress hormone, which definitely does damage to our bodies. So this is that process of where your body's actually absorbing that social stress or anxiety. Ethno-Etiologies and Prevention, cross-culturally specific, it's basically causal explanation for health problems and suffering. So different culture groups are going to have different reasons for suffering and or health problems. Again, some culture groups may think that you are infected by a ghost. Some culture groups may think that you've wronged the spirits or the ancestors. There's shamans that are doing black magic. There's all kinds of, or that you, again, you didn't wash your hands before you ate food. All of these things turn into this kind of specific kind of cultural explanation for health problems. Structural suffering, health problems caused by economic and political factors such as war, famine, terrorism, forced migration, and poverty. These are all very real things that also, again, cause stress and or malnutrition and lack of proper health care. Ritual health protection, this gets into charms, spells, prayer is also part of this. So those elements are definitely part of a ritual health protection. I guess what's fascinating to me is that this can start to move into, rituals can also start to move into maybe things that we are doing physically, not just kind of in a symbolic way. But again, this has a lot to do with placebo, right? So if I have kind of a ritual to exercise a certain amount each day, or chew raw ginger, I've given you some insight into my own rituals. These are things that people or our culture groups have said that are healthy. So I utilize those, but they have turned into a ritual. So it's turned more into a kind of symbolic connection for myself. And this is typically what we do. Community healing, community events which focus energy and can help heal. So this a lot of times when I talk about community healing, the idea of church groups maybe saying a prayer all at the same time for an individual who is in the hospital or something like this. This could be a version of community healing. Humoral healing is balance among elements of the body, like heating and cooling effect. So a lot of East Asian tradition, they really focus on that balance between the hot and cold effect. And if your body is like too warm or too cold, it's kind of that perfect balance that if you're too warm or too cold, then you're susceptible to certain ailments. Healers, male healers in the indigenous tradition would be called shaman, and females are called shamakas. And they typically mediated between physical and spiritual world. Midwifery I put on here is, again, a female who would know kind of exactly how pregnancy goes and would be able to help people through that. Now there is another term that's called salvage medical anthropology. Remember, Boaz did salvage ethnography to document the Kwakiutl dance practices and traditional dress because he knew that they were going to fade away. The same is going on in medical anthropology, which is indigenous groups have a keen knowledge of the natural environment and or what is healthy or can cure disease in terms of plants and herbs. However, these indigenous groups are being wiped out due to deforestation and search for oil and things like that, and just westernization and easternization, the idea that people need to civilize. And the problem is that we're losing a lot of this knowledge. So a lot of medical anthropologists are going in and trying to salvage this information in order to understand kind of these cures and the relationship between the natural world. Phytotherapy, healing through the use of plants. So again, this is kind of what salvage medical anthropologists would look at. Let me go back real quick to shaman. Sorry. A lot of times when they did their healing, and I think we get into this a little bit with religion as well. But a lot of times shamans would, at least in Native American culture, they kind of are portrayed as maybe individuals who have some, I don't want to say, like outside of the social norm mentality. So it could include schizophrenia or something that causes them social anxiety for them not to get along. So a lot of times shamans or shamakas ended up living alone, like in the forest, but they would be the medical doctor. So if somebody was ill, they would call in these shamans or shamakas and they would perform a medical kind of ritual. And a lot of times these individuals would basically have kind of a black concoction in their mouth. And then they would do a lot of sucking practice. So they would, if your chest, like your upper chest or some place on your back or something hurt or your leg, the shaman would actually attach their mouth to that area and act like they're really sucking something out of you and then blow the black concoction out of their mouth, giving that individual who is suffering from this ailment the idea that they have basically taken away what was causing them this pain. And again, this is totally a placebo effect. So this is the total connection between mind body. And again, indigenous people did this for thousands and thousands of years, and it worked some of the times, right? Just like our placebos work some of the time as well. So shamans served a specific function, and a lot of times they were outsiders. But then, I mean, there are groups that also had kind of the dedicated shaman who was kind of the shaman of the antelope hunt and had this kind of ritual symbolic connection to a specific hunt. So there's a wide range of shamans and shamakas, but they are definitely seen as medical healers through this connection between the spiritual and physical world. Theoretical approaches, ecological. Ecological or epidemiological approach examines how aspects of the natural environment interact with culture. They cause health problems. So the example that we use here is like the spread of STDs, and it's much more quantitative and kind of an outsider perspective. So it doesn't really have the insider perspective. It's much more come into a culture group and kind of tell them that this is the problem, this is what's going on, we tested it in the lab. This is what we're used to in the West. Historical trauma, as a definition, intergenerational transfer of emotional and psychological effects of colonialism from parents to children. This gets into epigenetics a little bit. What is the impact of our trauma, and how do we pass that down to our children? Culturally, we're going to pass it down through stories and stuff like that. It could even just be passed down in our normal demeanor. If these historic traumas have totally affected our kind of identity and our way of behaving and acting, then we're going to pass that down to our children through culture as well. There also, it looks like there's a biological connection with the epigenetics a little bit too, so that this is playing out not only culturally, but again, that feedback loop on the physical, spiritual side of things. So you could kind of think something and then it's going to ultimately kind of play out in your genetics as well. The next approach is Interpretivist approach, or critical medical anthropology. And they're going to examine health systems as systems of meaning. So again, more of an emic perspective, understanding that culture and why they think the way that they do. And how different cultures describe and experience illness, and how healing systems offer relief to patients and communities. So this is much more of an open-minded structure where we're trying to figure out like why and how different groups are healing people in these ways. The placebo effect, meaning effect, positive result from healing method due to a symbolic or otherwise non-material factor. I've been talking about placebo kind of all day. So critical medical anthropology focuses on analyzing how structural factors such as global, political, economy, class inequality, and media affect health systems. So this is a much more kind of insider perspective. So maybe like taking a specific health issue from a specific culture and then kind of backing out and saying, well, the reason why this is existing is because of this neoliberal Coca-Cola plant moving into this indigenous population and basically diverting this culture group's water to the Coca-Cola plant. So now they have to walk further to go get water. This would be more kind of these issues, and their water is not as good in these places. They start to drink out of the ponds that are have cholera and other waterborne diseases. Medicalization is the Western biomedicine can hurt the poor through pills and treatments. So this is a lot of traditional healing practices believe that the Western kind of take a pill for this is often not right. And again, they have an ethnocentric bias towards that, and we tend to have an ethnocentric bias towards natural healing. It's much more kind of a fluid piece, but we tend to get into our binaries around that. Disease of development, two things that have come about, and cancer may be on this list. There's a lot of research into development in industrialized nations having higher rates of cancer. Depression and obesity did not really exist prior to agriculture and civilization, so-called civilization. Medical pluralism basically is going to offer patients choice. So this is a bridge between that westernization or the Eastern medicine where we get into maybe healing people with herbs, but also using Western medicine. But it basically opens up the door to the patient to decide what they want to use in terms of healing themselves. Applied medical anthropology. This is, again, how can medical anthropologists be used in Western medicine? So this is kind of a flip. How do we utilize this? One of the issues, especially in America, is that we tend to have a lot of different culture groups, and doctors tend to treat people in one way because they're taught a certain way. Again, no fault of their own. But medical anthropologists, in an applied sense, can improve doctor-patient relationships, be able to explain to both groups what both groups are kind of thinking, and be that bridge, that a kind of non-binary bridge, if you will. They shed light on cultural barriers and healing and illness, right? So like if a certain culture group, like the Hmong, believed that epilepsy is caused by kind of spirits and doing something wrong, maybe in the kind of spirit world, bridging that gap with the doctors to let them know that that's what's going on, but then also kind of be that communication between the doctor and the patient is vital. Public health communication and vaccines. Obviously, this is kind of up front and center in terms of our culture and what it's going through. This huge anti-vaccination movement is around, and this comes out of some fear and kind of different cultural perceptions around vaccinations, government, power, and modern medicine, really. Intercultural health, improve Western and local health relationships through prevention and treatment of health problems. So the easiest thing that we can do in terms of that whole treatment aspect is to prevent health issues. And I feel that this is where, again, in terms of an analysis, maybe Western medicine hasn't really focused completely on, which is if we just prevent these diseases, like, we try to tell people the truth about certain foods that we're putting out there, and really emphasize it like they have with tobacco, then we wouldn't have all the health issues that we have. However, being in an individualistic society like America, we tend to just kind of let a lot of those things go and leave it up to the individual. Remember, that's a very cultural specific. In Europe and in Asia, they don't allow for these things. If there's something that is causing certain ailments or problems with the population, they will either put a tax on it or ban it. There's not a whole lot of like gray, like we'll just leave it up to the people stuff, because in the end it costs us all, especially as taxpayers. And in these kind of large macro systems of economics, we're all interrelated. So again, the American kind of individualistic system is very individualistic, even in our health and food industries. So I'm going to move into food, and I probably only have one. I might only have one more lecture session, so it might be just 3 this week. But I'll start. The Columbian Exchange. This is what it looks like. You guys have probably been exposed to the Columbian Exchange, but this is a good little list for you to look at. Again, looking at things like potatoes, corn, tomatoes, peppers, sweet potatoes, pineapples, chocolate, vanilla, all beans. Those things are all going to come from the New World and go to the Old World. And then you see the list of going to the New World, which is most of the animal products, bananas from Southeast Asia, honeybees. We had native bees here, so it's the European honeybee that they're focused on. Onions, garlic, citrus fruit. But then the real kind of thing to focus on, and also the grains, right? Wheat, rice, barley, oats. The New World had amaranth and quinoa, kind of the healthier grains. But I really want to focus on the diseases here. There's no diseases that are going from the New World to the Old World. The diseases are all coming from the Old World because we had mass animal domestication. So you have smallpox, influenza, measles,